week, police believe they'd made significant arrests. But key players were still on the run, and a mountain of cash was missing.
Thursday something's happened, Friday something's happened, Saturday we're starting warrants, Sunday we're starting searches, or we're continuing with those searches and we're finding stuff, and everything's moving very, very fast.
And the robbers were about to make their third basic mistake. They hadn't been able to move all the money on quickly enough. A little over a week after the robbery, officers discovered a huge haul of cash in a rented-out corner of a car salvage firm in South London. It would confirm their theory that the heist was committed not just by a Kent gang, but by a gang from the capital as well.
They've recovered what's thought to be several £1 million in cash, perhaps the most significant find since the raid on Wednesday last week.
Detectives found vehicles linked to London mechanic Roger Coutts, the first evidence of a London connection. 2 days later, he was arrested.
And Roger Coutts was a name that was coming into our inquiry as having been involved. And he was coming in as a name involved with other people from South London. These were people that we didn't really know in Kent and hadn't come to our notice before.
Mick and his team wanted to know more about the associates of Roger Coutts. Their inquiries were about to lead them to the world of cage fighting and this man.
Oh, the hairs on the back of my neck are standing up, Rob.
Everybody's hungry for this one. The fans just cannot wait.
Lee Murray was a celebrity hard man, one of the biggest names in the sport, based on a mix of martial arts.
Lee Murray, both men just trading blows.
That's what the crowd want to see.
Anderson Silva's taken a couple, and they move to ground.
His best friend was Paul Allen. Both grew up on the same South London estate as Roger Coutts.
Lee Murray and Paul Allen's names were already within the inquiry. They'd already come in as part of our inquiries. But once we discovered the cars and the link with Roger Coutts, it concreted our suspicions.
Lee Murray was a proper up-and-coming South London gangster who knew his way around drugs and guns and had something about him. Actually isn't stupid.
Oh, good kick by Silva. He's rocked Lee Murray and follows it up with a good strike.
Lee Murray's number 2 is Paul the Enforcer Allen, who's been his friend since childhood. He's his corner man in cage fighting. He's another steroid-enhanced he-man. Big tough guy, but actually not, you know, and mixed up in guns and drugs and God knows what, as the court has heard.
If you haven't heard of Lee Murray, I don't know where you've been, but Lee Murray was and probably is the most famous cage fighter in England, if not the world.
Cage fighting promoter Dave O'Donnell knew Lee Murray as he rose through the ranks in South London.
Lee Murray was a big draw. You know, he had a big following, maybe from his street background, but he was a leader. He was a born leader. So as soon as it was Lee Murray was fighting, the venue was packed out. It was a sellout. It was dynamite. You know, Lightning Lee Murray was his nickname. And it was. Every time he stepped into that cage, there was going to be lightning going off. When Lee used to come to our shows, people say, is he the same in the cage or outside the cage? You know, I've seen him in front of a bouncer like that saying, who are you looking at? Who are you looking at? You know, he wasn't scared of no man. And that's the thing with Lee. Lee was everything outside as he wanted inside. He was the real deal.
Detectives discovered that Lee Murray was a gym buddy of Lee Rusher. They believed they were the link between the Kent gang and the London gang. Together, the two gangs had carried out the audacious raid. They strongly suspected Murray and his best friend Paul Allen, known as the Enforcer, were involved. But it was too late. The pair were now living the high life, 1,200 miles away in Morocco.
I went to Morocco and I investigated how Lee Murray's life in Morocco. And he lived very conspicuously, and he lived very extravagant. He would put videos, he would go into nightclubs and ask the nightclub owner to show DVDs of his fights. He'd buy £35,000 watches, he'd spend £2,000 on a night out, he'd tip a doorman a week's wages.
Behind the scenes, detectives were working hard to build a case against the suspects they already had behind bars. They'd arrested the foot soldiers, but the man who they suspected to be the brains behind the heist was still out of reach. Detectives were on the trail of cage fighter Lightning Lee Murray and his best friend Paul the Enforcer Allen, seen here in the red T-shirt.
Just weeks after the £53 million robbery at this cash depot, the men were living the high life in Morocco. Police in Britain wanted to bring them back here to stand trial. They'd tracked them down to the capital, Rabat, and with the help of local police, Kent detectives were ready to move in.
Moroccan officers seized their chance when the pair were spotted at an upmarket shopping centre in the city.
Al Jazeera flashes a news flash, it's a terrorist attack, because they think it's a terrorist incident. There's so many police involved, everyone's screaming, women are crying and fainting. It's absolute bedlam. Anyway, they finally get hold of Lee and the enforcer, tie them up, carry them out battering ram style into the vans, take them back to the villa where they've been living, where of course there's loads of drugs, cocaine.
Both Allen and Murray were jailed for possessing drugs, while Detective Chief Inspector Mick Judge tried to get the pair extradited to face charges relating to the robbery. Meanwhile, back in Britain, police were preparing to put the other suspects on trial. In June 2007, less than 18 months after the robbery, the trial began at the Old Bailey amid tight security. The jury was told that the gang had an inside man who had helped them plan the robbery. It wasn't depot boss Colin Dixon, as some had suspected. It was this man, Albanian immigrant Ermir Husenai.
But it turns out Colin was innocent, and the inside man was this clerk, this Albanian clerk, Ermir Husenai, old friend of Jetmir Papa.
The jury was shown these images of Husenai here on the left. He had filmed the inside of the depot for the gang using a secret camera hidden in his belt.
And there he was counting the money, you know, counting the 200 million quid that's piled up, you know, ceiling high in this place. And of course he's drawing the plans, he's filming, he gets a camera in there, amazingly, films the whole thing, smuggles the camera out, and he's their inside man.
4 months into the trial, defendant Michel Hogg, here hidden under the umbrella, turned and became the prosecution's star witness. The makeup artist who had disguised some of the robbers dramatically decided to give evidence against them in exchange for the charges being dropped against her, a deal known as talk and walk.
Michelle swears blind. She had no idea what it was all about. She was told it was all for a game that Lee was going to play. This is Big Lee, as she called him, Lee Murray. He was going to make a computer game about cage fighting called Hitman. And all these ragamuffin mates of his, Slippery Royal, even though he was middle-aged, short and fat, they were all going to be bit players in this cage fighting game, and they all needed disguises.
She put names behind the faces. She actually told us who had been made up and what they looked like when they were made up, which then gave us who the kidnappers were, who the robbers were, and that was vitally important and a good decision in my opinion.
In court, Michel Hogg identified Stuart Royal, Lee Rusher, Jetmir Butchpapa and Roger Coutts. Her evidence was vital for the prosecution, and on January the 29th, 2008, after a 7-month trial, all 4 men, along with the inside man Husenai, were convicted of conspiracy to kidnap and rob.
Good evening. 5 men, some dressed as policemen, were today convicted of carrying out the biggest ever robbery in Britain. Their plan to get into the depot was cunning. Their plan to escape was not. They left behind 3 times more money than they took, and they left the clues that eventually led to their conviction today.
The robbers were given indeterminate sentences with a minimum of 15 years. The inside man, Husenai, was jailed for 20 years. Author Howard Soons was in court.
Hogg had got her get out of jail free card, so she was scot-free. And Stuart Royal, Slippery, didn't even have the guts to actually face the verdict. Wouldn't leave his prison cell at Belmarsh for the actual verdict. Hadn't been in court for weeks. The only guys who faced the music, as one might say, were Russia, who took it like a gangster. You know, he was like a Corleone, double-breasted suit. He stood there, took it on the chin. Ermir, who seemed a bit emotional. Butch Papa, who, as one of his defence people told me, I said, your man looks cheerful. He said, well, he's pretty thick too. I mean, he didn't seem to know how much trouble he was in. I mean, he's not going to get out of prison until 2022.
Make-up woman Michelle Hogg, who denied any wrongdoing, was given a new identity under the Witness Protection Scheme. Detective Chief Inspector Mick Judge was in Morocco when he heard the verdicts. He was about to bring Paul Allen back to Britain so he too could face trial. The authorities had agreed to extradite him. They refused, however, to extradite Murray. He had claimed Moroccan citizenship. His father was originally from the country. At Paul Allen's trial in January 2009, he pleaded not guilty to involvement in the robbery and kidnap.
He got a hung jury, so we had to do the whole thing all over again. So there was a third trial scheduled, but at the start of the third trial, dear old Paul, the enforcer, threw his hands up to it and said, I'm guilty, gov, did a bit of a deal, got a slightly lesser sentence, and was hauled off to do 18 years.
Allen had admitted his part in planning the robbery. But what of Lee Murray? Of all the gang, he got off most lightly when eventually convicted in Morocco and jailed for 10 years. Today, the police investigation is far from over. There were 7 robbers in the cash depot that night, and detectives want to speak to Kehinde Patterson. They believe he could be the man wearing the bogus police uniform. Detectives also want to speak to this man, Sean Lupton, suspected of being the money man. He's believed to have fled to northern Cyprus, possibly with 32 million of the 53 million pounds stolen.
So where's the missing 30 million? Well, Lee Murray had a big lump of it, didn't he? Because he bought himself a mansion in Morocco. Paul bought a mansion, they bought themselves fancy cars, and they spent a fortune. So they had a big lump of it. And the evidence heard in court was that other money got to Cyprus, and one presumes some got to the West Indies with Kehinde Patterson, if indeed that's where he is. And Dubai has also been mentioned. And of course, the truth is that this 30 million has long since been split up and it's been distributed in the criminal fraternity.
There is always going to be, in a case like this, money that's never recovered. We will continue to pursue those people responsible, and we get the money back via assets. Of course, it would be lovely to have all of it back in the depot where it was taken from. But realistically, I think we've done remarkably well to get as far as we have.
This is not an unqualified police success story. The police did a very good job, the police do a difficult job, but 30 million quid plus is missing, and I think it's very unfortunate that Lee Murray wasn't focused in on and picked up before he left the country.
But what of the victims of this crime? Colin Dixon and his family had to start a new life away from the home they loved. He also had to leave his job.
Things could have turned out so much differently. If the police had turned up early, I don't know how the robbers would have reacted. They might have harmed my wife and child. Any member of staff could have been shot. We are lucky to be here. Lucky to be alive.
Meanwhile, others who were with him that night still bear the mental scars of what happened.
You still get nightmares. See, people will look at this programme and they will think that was a big heist, you know, the biggest heist in Britain, and it was in the past. I mean, it's very real and present to me. You know, you wake up and from a nightmare, that's real and present to you. You know, that's in the now. It's still not in the past.
I think we all think we understand what fear is, from little kids to as you get older. Different things, you think that's fear. In those circumstances, you know what fear is, and it's something that I will never, ever forget. I know that smell and taste, and I will live with that for the rest of my life.
Ahead of the Chancellor's autumn spending review, we investigate just how much our lives will be affected by the biggest cuts in public spending for decades. That's the Tonight programme on Thursday night at 7:30.